I was talking to some of the guys at break that the page Badu that you guys, that the girls out here, you are the people that out here utilize. I didn't know that existed. We in the United States see Backpage. That's primarily where 70% or so, roughly, they say, 70% of sex trafficking in the United States happens on Backpage. So you guys do have Backpage here in Nigeria. I pulled it up on my phone, but apparently it's not to the extent that Badu is. So you do have Backpage, and it wouldn't surprise me actually if the company that owns Backpage owned Badu, because they own companies all around the world that advertise for sex trafficking. Backpage operates in about 400 different cities around the world, or 400 different countries. So they operate all throughout Europe and Italy and Spain, where we know, as you guys are well aware, or a lot of people from Nigeria end up in those countries. And Backpage runs sites up there where the girls, once they get up there, if they're not in a brothel, or even if they are in brothels, they advertise on Backpage. A couple of quick questions I had. So we had talked this morning, and you guys mentioned that you know, if you're on Badu, you can call up a girl and arrange to meet her at a hotel, for example. Are those girls typically working for guys, for pimps? Are they working for pimps most of the time? No? They're not. So they're just strictly on their own. Okay, so you do have...
We still have pimps who have girls, like, and they give them some of their returns after the year. So you have
now, do you have pimps that put girls on Badu?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, they do that.
I mean, that's in the U.S. Most of the girls, if not all of them, most of the girls on Backpage have pimps. So, you know, you'll pick up the phone and you'll meet them at a hotel, but they're getting dropped off by a guy, and he'll be at the hotel next door in another room, and he'll be waiting for her to be done, and she's giving him the money. And if I understand it correctly, one of the things you guys can do here is, so you can call up a girl like working undercover, posing as and then go meet her at the hotel. When you guys arrest her, how often, if ever, do they admit to being trafficked or having a pimp? Does that happen often or ever? Finally? Okay. So we, in the U.S., we have undercover officers that call Backpage all the time and meet girls all the time. But that's one of the difficulties is getting them to admit that they're working for somebody. And we'll talk about a case tomorrow, if not today, tomorrow, in the United States. It's one we just did where that was a perfect example of how that was happening with us and what we did to overcome it through following the money. Do you guys, one of the other things we do with Backpage, and I'd be curious if you guys did it here, a lot of times we have our female detectives or investigators in the United States will place ads on Backpage and soliciting pimps, or not necessarily soliciting pimps, but they'll get calls from guys wanting them to work. Do you guys do that here?
Okay. So it's not an action or an activity that you find very common. When girls are being prostituted, or like instead of trafficking, we have madams and then the traffickers. But for pimping, internal trafficking through pimping is not as common in Nigeria.
I think
please, I want to draw a distinction in the explanation when they were saying about Badu. The girls there are usually on their own. If they have pimp, is kind of an agreement. They pay off the pimp. But the issue we have here in Nigeria, we have the madams recruiting these minors. They keep them somewhere. Usually they operate in brothels. That's the scenario we have here. They keep them in brothels. They solicit, the madams solicit for these girls. They collect the money up front. They'll now, okay, go to room, so, meet this person, they meet the girls and they go. That is what we have here. The pimp scenario is not the ideal situation here. In our law, the problem we have is the prostitution of others. You make money from the prostitution of another person, not the prostitution itself. That is of others, yes. No, that is not what we have here. That's not the scenario. Yes.
Like those days when it was a military era, where there's a party, these guys come and then they organize girls and take. But when the scenario that is happening in America is more of these pimps are making money out of what you do, out of the sex. But when even in that institution, if guys are organizing party and they send a guy to go and organize girls, we call those guys pimps. Because they organize girls, but the girls that go to that party do not pay to the pimp. It's the guys that organize the party that pay the pimp. I went to the higher institution too.
Hello. As an investigator, I've actually had to browse through Facebooks. There are specific cases where there are pimps, but they tell that they can arrange any woman of your choice. So it's still at the developmental stages, not as widespread as in the US, but it still exists. But at developmental stages, at least I've encountered one or two of them on Facebook. They say they can supply you with a certain number of girls if you want.
So,
we have a lot of pimps in the higher institutions, like in the universities. They even have registers where they have pictures, and you can go there and look at the picture and see who you want and pick. In schools, that's in higher institutions.
And in addition to that, excuse me. No, in addition to that, can I just, for me, I'll speak about my personal experience with this pimping business. It has been on. And for me personally, I know that there were girls in my school who these pimps organized accommodations for them and all that. So when you go out and finish your business with the men, you must come back and give them. That was how they were able to.
So you're giving them a percentage of what you made.
Them and even pay for those accommodations. So.
Okay. Percentage. You gave them percentage. Okay. And that's common at higher institutions? Okay. But at the hotels or whatnot, you'll have a madam that will recruit girls, but she still gets a percentage, correct?
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry. Like the pimping thing in Nigeria, like they have rightly said, the exploitation that should be established for trafficking is not there. The pimps allow you to do the job if you want to. And you come back on your own volition to give something to them, to appreciate them. No, to appreciate them. But one thing about trafficking.
You guys let him finish up.
I'm coming. One thing about trafficking I want us to understand. Our own. The people that are peculiar to trafficking in Nigeria, we call them agents. At times we use the word trolley for them. They are the gap between the main trafficker and some of those victims. They go out and get them.
everybody, I just want to ask, please, this discussion is great, the disagreement is great, that's how we all learn, but I just want to make sure that we can all hear and that we're respecting everyone's opinion and that this is a space where everyone feels comfortable sharing. So let's keep the discussion going. We have enough time today for everyone to share and to exchange ideas, but let's try when one person is speaking to respect them so that we can hear their opinion. All right.
Hello, yeah. I just want to bring up an issue. What if the madam that is recruiting is outside the country and controls the victim from Nigeria to the destination without seeing the victim? They recommend the victim to her. They send pictures, they send information about the victim. And in her house, she has her own syndicate to control the movement of the victim to like a place like, let's say, Libya. Somebody is in Libya. They will now control the victim from Nigeria. The victim will not pay a dime, but will find herself in Libya through all the routes, mostly land routes. So what do you call that kind of person? A pimp or a madam? No, listen to me very carefully. That person is going to benefit from the exploitation of that victim. The person at the destination country is the one financing the movement.
So you guys. I can tell you guys this. So that mirrors a lot of the same stuff that we see in the United States with people coming from Mexico. You're getting paid. You're paying a fee at some point to get moved into another country, but we call them coyotes. So a coyote is the person that moves the illegals that are getting smuggled from Mexico up into the United States. So we call them coyotes. You guys call them control agents. It's just a different name, but it's the same practice. It's the same principle. So it's just, you guys are calling it different things, and we'll probably talk about it today. I mean, there's a way to investigate that stuff, because one of the case studies we have today is an investigation that was done in Italy where they arrested a bunch of people in Italy, and we looked at, and I mentioned it yesterday, I asked Western Union to send us the financial transactions related to those people that were arrested, and you can see there's money that moves from Benin City up to Agadez, up to Tripoli, and then into Catania and Milan and all those other places. So those are different ways that you can do these investigations other than the way that we're doing them right now, right? Because, so one of the things, like I said earlier, we in the U.S., we try and, we have undercover officers all the time that call Backpage. They'll meet a girl in a hotel room, and then she gets arrested, and they want to know, we all know that she's working for somebody. She's giving some guy, whether you call him a madam or a pimp, whatever you want to call him, she's giving somebody a percentage. That guy's controlling her. And a lot of times we have a hard time getting to them, so we do some other things to get to them without having to rely on the girl, because we know she doesn't want to talk to us, right? So we're going to get into that. So we're going to start, before we get into how we do these things, the financial part of it, and I'll tell you some of what the tools we have in the United States that allow us to do this. And I want to see what the ability is of you guys to do this here in Nigeria, and if it's something that you utilize at all. So in the U.S., we have something called the Bank Secrecy Act. And it's, as you can see, it's from 1970. It's an old act, but it's what requires the financial institutions to keep records for customers, and that they have to share them with law enforcement. So it could be banks, it could be money service businesses, like I said, the Western Unions of the world, the MoneyGrams of the world, the RIAs, the things that are most commonly utilized to move money around the world for people that don't have bank accounts. So we've utilized this tool for years, and there are 4 main reports. There's 4 big reports, really 2 of them, that are required by these institutions to file, which allow us to get these records. The main 2 are the top 2. It's called the Currency Transaction Report, and a Suspicious Activity Report is the second one. if somebody walks into a bank, or it doesn't matter where, in the United States with $10,000 in cash or more, they file a CTR. It's called the Currency Transaction Report. So the bank will have to file the CTR saying Rich LaBelle walked into this bank on this day and gave us $10,000 in cash. Now, the suspicious activity report is something that are really valuable for us. So if I'm a bad guy, if I'm a trafficker and I have $15,000 in cash, I know I can't go into a bank and give them $10,000 because the bank is going to file a report on me, and I don't want law enforcement to see that. So what I'll do is I'll go to 3 different banks, or I'll go to the same bank over 3 days, and I'll give them $5,000 each day because I'm below that $10,000 amount. And we call that structuring. But the bank will file the suspicious activity report on that, and we can get the backup supporting documents related to those. And they're super, super valuable pieces of information. Do you guys have anything in Nigeria that's along those lines? Yes. So what are they called?
When you're making a transaction within the range of, I think, $1 million as a private individual, the bank reports to the Financial Intelligence Unit, FIU. Then if it's a corporate body, 5 million. I think that's, so there's a report to the Financial Intelligence Unit.
So 5 million and $1 million, is that what you said? Just $5 million for your currency though, correct? So which is I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to do the math in my head.
And not only that, and not only that, and in the course of our investigations, we can actually make a request to the Financial Intelligence Unit that wants a record of transaction of a particular suspect. We do that all the time.
You do it all the time?
Yes, all the time, yes.
Okay. So he said that they do it all the time in terms of requesting financial, a little bit higher, yes. So your dollar amount's a little bit higher than ours in terms of reporting requirements.
Even if you have
Sorry, with the BVN. So even if you have 5 accounts, they link it back to you. So, yeah, you have.
It doesn't matter if it's at different banks?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You have a BVN number. I have. She has. Everybody.
Okay, so it's almost like a national ID number that you have to use. That's okay. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. So then the last 2 here was, you guys, as you guys can see, the CMIR and the foreign bank account report. The CMIR is something that we have to file if you go into the United States or you leave the United States for more than $10,000 in your possession. That's a report that's supposed to be filed, and something we can charge people with if they don't do that. We see it mostly with people going to and from Mexico, trying to hide money in their cars or hide money coming back in. And then the foreign bank account report is something where if a U.S. citizen, if you have more than $10,000 in a bank account outside of the United States, we have to let the U.S. government know we can be charged. And that came about from, well, really in the Caribbean. There's Cayman Islands. That was, for years, a lot of Americans kept money there because of the tax purposes and whatnot. And that's kind of how this thing came about. So this is like I said, back to 1970. These are reports that have existed for us for, we're 50 years now, and it's really one of the things that's kind of the backbone that allows us to do what we do. Another one is the Patriot Act, and this was from after the World Trade Centers got bombed in New York City back on 9/11. The United States decided to, there was a belief that a lot of internationals had access to the United States financial, and our U.S. government said we need to control that, or at least control. We have to be more knowledgeable of the people that are utilizing our financial system. So the Patriot Act came about. It affects everybody, both U.S. and non-U.S. citizens that are utilizing the U.S. financial institutions. But the big thing for us, and it's something that doesn't get used enough, I don't think, is the 314B program. It doesn't get utilized enough by U.S. law enforcement. And so 314B is, there's 314B and 314A. 314A is what law enforcement can use in the United States. So I can file a 314A request. So if I have a bad guy and I know he has a bank account at Chase Bank or Bank of America or Wells Fargo, but I suspect he has bank accounts at 6 other places or credit cards or whatnot, I can just send a 314A request to FinCEN, which is our FIU, and that notice goes out to thousands of financial institutions around the United States and even some outside of the United States. And within 2 weeks, they get back to us as the investigators, and they'll let us know all the banks that individual has accounts in. So because we don't have like the BVN, right? Yeah, we're supposed to be able to link bank accounts through our social security numbers that we all have that's unique to us, but a lot of times these people are able to circumvent that. So it's nice that when we file these 314As. And then the last is FinCEN. That's our FIU. So all of the reports that we talked about, FinCEN is the repository of those reports. So FinCEN is a massive database that all law enforcement agencies can go into and run a query by a name or a telephone number to find out if these reports exist. So if a bank filed in what we call a suspicious activity report on you, any law enforcement officer in the U.S. ultimately has access to that. We can go in there, run a query, and it will pull up the report for you. And it will link reports together through individuals if they've been put in there. It's a great source of information for us. We utilize it in financial crimes every single day, and it's kind of one of those things it's almost automatic. If you're doing financial investigation, everyone's getting run through FinCEN. It's just pulling up all sorts of background information, and it's also part of our EGMOT group, which is EGMOT is the informal transfer of information amongst countries. Like if somebody from Nigeria went to their FIU and said, hey, we want to get information on this in the United States, your FIU would reach out to FinCEN, which is our FIU, to get that information. So now, your guys' FIU, is there a database that you guys can query? Do they have a database that you can query in your FIU?
Financial Crimes Commission. They have all the information. So we also interact with them. We send information to them. The FCC, looks at the financial transactions and all that, and they get back to us through the FIU too. Yeah.
When you guys do these things here, like if you want to get bank records from a bank, do you guys have to serve them with a subpoena? We call it a subpoena. It's like a legal service to get information. Or can you guys just pick up the phone and call them?
There's what is called banker's order, issued by the court.
Court?
Yes, so when we have any suspects that we are trying to track his account for financial, to trace the financial transaction, we go to the court and get banker's order and then do a backup letter to the bank. And they have always obliged us.
It's very similar for us. We either get a court order. It depends on, there's certain federal agencies that can order administrative subpoena and they'll give us the financial records. Does it take a long time for you guys to get those records? See, for us, For financial records from a bank, it can take us a couple months. It'll take them 2 months to get it. It depends on the bank. Right.
Looking for. Most often, it's usually just the statements. So
exactly. Okay, so it's the same exact thing with us. We'll serve our orders on the banks. It goes to their legal processing unit who reviews them. And then depending on, if we just want bank statements, it comes in quicker. If we're asking for copies of canceled checks and whatnot, then it takes for a longer period of time. So it's the same. And that's the one frustrating part about doing financial investigations, right? It takes a little bit longer. But again, sometimes you just have to do them because there are easier ways to prosecute people. You know, one of the things myself and Tony were talking about when you guys were talking earlier this morning, and we were talking about how times a lot of families will send girls off to another country, and it's really, you know, it's greed or whatever you want to call it. They know what they're doing, but they don't care because they're getting money coming in. And then all of a sudden the families have a big house. In the United States, we would be taking those houses. So we would be seizing asset forfeiture. So essentially what we would do is we would we'd utilize all these tools here to do background work on the individuals that own that house. Ultimately, we're going to ask them, where did you get the money to buy? Yes. Yeah, where did you get the money to pay for that house? And it's unexplained wealth, right? They can't explain. They have to be able to show us. They have to be able to show us how they paid for that house. And it has to be legitimate. You know, we'll be pulling, in the US, we have the ability to find out how much people make. So we have, in our state, it's called Department of Economic Services. And I can go on their website, as law enforcement, we can go onto their website, and unless you own your own business, it's a little bit more difficult if you own the business. But I can go into that website and put in my name and social security number, and they'll tell that anybody can find out exactly how much money I've made over the past 3 years. And then we'll send a subpoena or a court order, whatever you want to call it, to the house is purchased or the title company, and find out how much was that house, how much did they pay for that house, how much money did they put down in loan in cash on it. Where owning that house, we're going to end up seizing the house and selling it, and then the pro state, and it gets forfeited.
Sorry, sir. You go ahead and seize the properties, even if you can't link them to the commission of a crime.
So do you guys, in order to seize, that is actually, I'm glad you brought that up. Do you guys have to have a conviction for a predicate offense to charge money laundering in Nigeria? In Rwanda, they had to have a conviction. You have to have a conviction to be able to charge somebody with money laundering on another offense or to seize anything.
No, for money laundering, I can't say, but for the human offenses of human trafficking, for you to seize, confiscate those properties, you need to link those properties to the commission of the crime.
No, there's been times where we've actually seized property in the state. And Tony, maybe you want to add some stuff to this, but there's times I can tell you guys when I was a detective, I'd seize actually homes and properties from people, and we actually never ended up convicting them criminally. But because we were able to show that they didn't have the money that was utilized to pay for those were the proceeds of criminal activity, we were able to seize that, and the court awarded those to us.
What I know we do, EFCC has the mandate to do that. I know that part of their law says if they're just moving and they see a property and the owner, they say, oh, who is the owner? And it's suspicious. they can do that. But for NAPTIP, we don't do that. If there is no conviction, ordinarily you wouldn't seize. And so many times you must connect the property to the crime and the trafficker. Yeah, you can't seize anything for the parent. I'm not sure we've done anything linked to, because I know a case where the suspect said, oh, we were tracing monies in our accounts. Oh, what did this money come in for? Oh, I bought properties for my house, and so my mother. Those things we don't get involved. Is what is linked to her directly. That's what we go after.
A good recommendation may be that you create a task force where you join forces, where you join together to do these investigations so that you can also follow the money, in addition to all the incredible work that NAPTIP is doing with human trafficking. Get a task force where you're working with your financial investigators, your financial prosecutors, to work on the same case so that you can find the money, seize the assets. For example, another thing that we can do in the United States is we can seize bank accounts. So if you have a family and they say they have a modest bakery, but their bank accounts are as large as a star football player for the Super Eagles. I mean, you're seeing millions, and you're saying, how do they have millions in a bank account in a bakery that normally it would make so much? You would have a financial analysis. You're saying something is out of the ordinary here. Having the most latest cars, they have the best technology. On that salary. Drug trafficking. It could be human trafficking. Any other listed activity that could raise those red flags where you will associate with your financial counterparts and say, let's take a look at this. We suspect human trafficking activity, but we also think that there will be money laundering or financial fraud on your resources. So a task force and developing a task force, I think, would be a very valuable tool to prosecute and investigate these cases.
Who does most of your, in this country, if you had somebody that, who does most of your financial investigations? The FCC. Okay. So do you guys understand what Tony was saying? If you guys had a couple of those people assigned to NAPTIP, so if you guys wanted to do the human trafficking part of it, but you said we need somebody to go after the assets.
The issue why some of this we are having dilemma also is Nigeria, we are not operating cashless policy. It's just of a recent invention. So people go about with cash, and so getting to really nail down people is pretty difficult. And often we seem to celebrate people who just make money overnight without asking too much question. It's just of now that the consciousness is coming, and so we really need to work hard.
In NAPTIP, we have what is called FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit, which is domiciled in EFCC. So if we want in the process of our investigations and we want financial information, we apply to the FIU in the EFCC. EFCC is the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. So they do the investigation, give us a report, which we use in our prosecution. Then upon conviction, that's what is called forfeiture of assets now. Those proceeds of the will now be, yeah.
I have an information.
This question, I'm looking at the faces of the prosecutors. We know that it's not been easy on this issue of assets forfeiture, because if you don't link the assets to that crime, it's very difficult for you to do that. And we have to appreciate our own society, different from the American society. That way, when it comes to financial crimes, they're way above us. Here in Nigeria, there are many people that are living above their means, and to say you're going to check to see whether somebody is living above his means, to start investigating, you're going to have a tall task to do, because most people are living above their means. We have, like you said, there was a cashless society, we were dealing most of cash, so it was really difficult to trace how this money is getting to people. The politicians spread money a lot out to people. So there are so many ways that people make money in Nigeria. And you can't, it's so difficult to trace it. But you see them, you see civil servants are living in larger houses, and these are people that are earning little. So if we are going to use that as an indicator, we're going to have too much on our hands. So what NAPTIP does is, if we are able to secure conviction and establish that this assets was gotten from this crime, then we can forfeit.
Yes, please. Just an information to that too. In addition, we don't seize assets or file for forfeiture until conviction is gotten. But I know there is something we call interim order for attachment of a property. So in the course of investigation and when a matter has been charged to court, NAPTIP can apply to the court to obtain an order to attach that property when there is reasonable ground to believe that property has been used. Yes, the proceeds of that property was substantially derived from the crime of human trafficking. So NAPTIP will apply for an interim order for forfeiture and for attachment of that property until the outcome of the investigation.
California does the same. We will not seize until we have a conviction. Yes. So we will also do it the same way. We will get a conviction and then seize. But if you also charge money laundering, that gives you another conviction. If you can establish it in addition to the human trafficking. Now, is there a way to freeze assets during an investigation? And that may be a valuable tool as well. So if you can freeze, convict, and seize, that's something that should be considered. And that is something that you may work with your financial counterparts in a task force to get that done jointly. And so that you're on the same page and you're moving forward with that type of activity.
I want to ask a question. In the United States, if somebody steals money like from African countries the way they do, and come and buy mansions and buildings and all that, do you follow them too to find out how they got the money to build to buy those assets? Or is only the citizens that you chase? Because what we know here that is most common is that most of our politicians, once they have money, they have estates, you know, they in Dubai, in all these countries, they build mansions, you know, and all that, edifices and all that in most of these countries. Do you still follow foreigners? And then the second one is that under the Criminal Justice Administration, AGJA, the emphasis is more on attaching the proceeds of the crime. So once they recover the proceeds of the crime, they are not ready, it's not on punishing the offender so much, but they want to recover the proceeds of the crime. Thank you.
The first question, if I understood it correctly, sometimes there are situations where a foreign prosecution unit or country can get the U.S. Attorney's Office, the federal prosecutors, to seize. But there are certain conditions, and I am not a federal prosecutor. A state prosecutor couldn't do that. But it can happen. It can happen. I know with Mexico there have been situations, but it's very difficult. Very, very difficult, because you can easily do it with a citizen, but with a non-citizen, it is difficult. But it can be done. I will give you an example. There are, right on the border where we live in San Diego, in Mexico, there are wealthy Mexicans who have purchased very expensive condominiums in the San Diego area. And the Mexican government sometimes says, can you seize that? Can you attach it? And it can be done, but it's a process. And first of all, you have to establish that a crime would be similar, that it was committed in both countries, that would allow for seizure and attachment. But that is a very, very difficult process to do, but it can be done. It can be done. If you find a worthwhile case, it would be to contact the United States Attorney General and get their offices to do it. Under state laws, we could not do it. We don't have that authority. And
yeah, I have a question. In Nigeria here, most traffickers outside Nigeria, they have an informal way of sending down the proceeds of crime. Some will get the money, they will buy cars and send to Nigeria here. And there's another form they call a hawala. This hawala, you cannot trace it. It's difficult for us to trace. I don't know you in America. You have a way of tracing the transfer of hawala.
So in terms of in America, tracing money that's moved through a hawala system obviously is difficult because it's based on trust, right? There's no records being kept. But in America, if you have to, you're considered a money transmitter business by doing that, and you have to have a license to do so. So we'll charge them with operating being an unlicensed money transfer service. Like Western Union, they are a licensed money service business. If you're operating a hawala, you're supposed to have a license, and they don't. So that's what we end up charging them with.
Okay, one of the issues that even our Director General has been hammering on is how to prosecute the traffickers over there. Because we have these madams over there, and most of the money they are making, they are investing in those countries. So how do we trace this money and get the money back to Nigeria? Yeah. Because most of them are investing back there. That was why Desmond said, you have this, even the politicians, now we're looking at the traffickers. They are making their money, they are investing in the foreign countries. They're not even investing in Nigeria. And the only way we can begin to track this, the only way we can begin to deter them is if we can even seize their assets over there.
Sure.
And that will be with the collaboration and cooperation of the country of origin.
So
I mean the destination country.
Yes. Yesterday, one of the things I said yesterday, if I said it once, I said it probably 10 times, was that's why it's so important for you guys especially to have foreign relationships, and you have to build a relationship with these other countries. And it might be tough because you guys might want to do it and you might not be getting cooperation from them. You know, Italy, for example, that doesn't want to prosecute their own people. They only want to prosecute the Nigerians that are up there. That's one of the things it's because so many of Nigerians get moved up to Europe. You're talking 3 or 4 different countries, so you're having jurisdictional limitations with you guys. In the United States, for us, a lot of the sex trafficking happens domestically. One thing that we do have a lot of in the United States is the massage parlors, and it's mostly women from China or South Korea, and a lot of that money goes back to China. A lot of it's Chinese organized crime, and we can't seize those proceeds. But I can tell you this: so in the United States, we have, and it's not very good. We have something called Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. It's called an MLAT. And if we want to get legal evidence that's admissible into court from another country, we have to file an MLAT. And it's our request. It goes up to our U.S. attorney is usually one who does it. It goes through our State Department. It has to get translated into the country that it's going to go to, into their language, and then it gets sent off to that particular country. And then that country gathers the evidence that we were requesting, and then they present it back to us, and we can utilize it in court. Now, that doesn't help with the assets, right? We do also have an agreement or treaties, and I can't remember exactly what it's called off the top of my head, but we do have treaties with certain nations that allow us to seize assets in other countries. The UK is one, for example. Like if we arrest a bad guy in the United States for whatever crime it may be, and they have money and assets in the UK, we can seize those assets. And there are certain countries around the world that we can do that. Unfortunately, and I didn't see how dated it was, but I looked on my flight on the way over here. I don't believe you guys have an MLAT with anybody. So there's no information sharing. But that's, again, that's part of the relationship process. It's part of cooperation with foreign governments. I mean, this is something that we have to build upon, right? It's something that needs to be done. And the same thing with asset forfeiture and whatnot. If you guys know you have a bad problem in this country with people going to Spain or to Saudi Arabia or to Italy as part of human trafficking, those are relationships that have to be made. And obviously it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And it's really going to be difficult if the country on the other end doesn't care.
But one of the things that you do learn is they often will care, because the money goes both ways. And you'll see the money going both ways, and you'll say, it will benefit us mutually because you have money that was sent that way legally, and we have money now that has been brought in illegally. And if you can develop those relationships and get mutual legal assistance treaties, you can get treaties to allow for that kind of forfeiture. The other one, and I don't know, and it was a question I was going to ask, are there any countries or even Nigeria that allow for extraterritorial prosecution? For example, in Mexico, and we use this all the time, we have their federal penal code allows a Mexican national to be prosecuted anywhere in the world. And so if they commit a crime in Nigeria, but they're a Mexican national, you can send an entire package to prosecute them over to Mexico, and Mexico will prosecute them. And if you have the possibility of extraterritorial jurisdiction, that's a better and more efficient way than an MLAT. And that's some research you may have to do to see if any of these countries that you see trafficking coming in provide for extraterritorial jurisdiction. If they do, that is a very valuable and powerful tool.
In Nigeria, we don't have, what we have the criminal code and the penal code. In the southern part of the country is criminal code, while in the north is penal code. So that's the way it is here.
You know, real quick, the other thing, and to piggyback off of what Tony was saying, one thing we have in the United States, the other thing we have, so say we, for this, and this is something that's very common in the United States for drug traffickers. So say we're in the United States, we're doing an investigation, and we're up on a wiretap investigation where we're listening to phones. And this is something that I did frequently over my career. We're listening to phones, and we know of a bad guy that's down in Culiacan, Sinaloa, which is in Mexico, where a good majority of the drugs that comes into the Arizona and the other parts of the United States comes from. And we have a guy that's on the phone, and we know he's the source of supply. We know he's the one sending cocaine up, and we have him identified. But he never comes into the United States. One of the other things, and you can translate that to human trafficking, okay? You have a person that you know is up in Italy, for example, and I just keep using Italy because we know that's one of the countries. You have a person that's up in Italy and is recruiting girls from Nigeria to come up there. She's coordinating things, she's directing things, she's receiving money, sending money back and forth. You'd have money laundering charges on her. One of the things you could do that we do in the United States is we get what you call a provisional arrest warrant. So we get an arrest warrant for that person, and so our bad guy in Mexico, we'll get an arrest warrant for him in the United States. And then we'll have our government will give that warrant, and we'll give it to Mexico, and Mexico will then go pick him up for us, and that person will get extradited back to the United States. Now it's a long process. It can take about a year to happen, and it's not something we do every single day, but we will do it for the real bad guys.
And it is important to know what extradition treaties you have, but not only that, what specified crimes. And if money laundering isn't there and human trafficking aren't there for any reason, make sure they're added, because that would give you that ability to be able to extradite someone and ask for their extradition.
And just so you know, not every country in the world will extradite people for us, obviously. There's people that don't like us, and they don't care what they did in our country. We can give them the warrant, and they're not going to send them to us. And they're like Tony said, not every single crime will people give them to us. If they know that they're going to come to the United States for murder and possibly face the death penalty, and that country doesn't believe in the death penalty, for example, they're not going to turn them over to us.
With an exception, and just sorry, sir. Sometimes you may have to make a condition. For example, with the death penalty, we would say we want that person, but we will not charge the death penalty if we want that murderer back in our country. And sometimes with a treaty, even so, you may have to make some conditional changes.
Yeah. I just wanted to share with us, you said the United States can seize assets in the UK if it is traced to crime. Can you share with us how you do it?
I'm sorry.
Can you share your experience with us on how you seize those assets from America and to UK?
So I can give you, I'll give you an example of something that there was a particular investigation that I did, and it involved a drug trafficker. He was a Jamaican drug trafficker that was in the United States. He was moving millions and millions and millions of dollars of drugs throughout the United States. He had several identities. We weren't sure really who he was or where he lived. Ultimately, after 2.5 years, we found out who he truly was, and we learned that he had a bunch of property in Panama, and then he had a bunch of property up in Canada. He owned a couple residences up in Canada, and he had bank accounts up there. So we got a forfeiture order in the United States, wrote it up just like we would as if he lived in the United States, but we worked with law enforcement. I worked with law enforcement in Canada. So what they had to do was I gave them my affidavits, my police reports. I gave them to the officers in Canada, and they wrote their own up there based off of our information, and they went to their courts, gave them the paperwork, and they seized the property up there. And then there was a sharing process where they shared it back with us, and they obviously, their government kept a percentage of it because they did work on it too. So obviously we let them keep their percentage of it.
In the affidavit would establish that a crime was committed in the United States, but it's the similar or same crime in Canada, to allow their prosecutors then to be able to seize it under their own domestic Canadian law.
And that's something that's important, because in some countries, if it's not a crime there, they're probably not going to be cooperating with you. And I had that happen with me in the Netherlands on a particular investigation where it wasn't a crime in the Netherlands, so they didn't care what was happening in the United States, and I didn't get any cooperation.
A very interesting example for human trafficking purposes: prostitution is now legal in Mexico. It is not a crime. It is legal. It is supposed to be done as an independent contractor, not have a promoter, but it is a business. It is a registered and regulated business. So it is. And so you have to take that into account if you have a case in a jurisdiction maybe where prostitution could be legal.
So you guys understand the different things that we have to think about? Possible policy changes and law changes, task forces. So as you guys know, I said yesterday, the organization I work for now, it's a nonprofit organization, but we work in a building, a massive building that has probably 200 to 300 law enforcement officers in there. We're the only nonprofit in there. Everyone else in there is part of different police departments. We're actually hooked up with the Arizona Financial Crimes Task Force. So I'm from the state of Arizona, and we're on a financial crimes task force that involves Phoenix, the local police department, our state police, the state attorney general's office has investigators assigned there, and then Homeland Security. So everybody has different strong suits. And for example, we said earlier, if you had people that did nothing but financial crimes and seized assets and handle that for you, let you guys do the human trafficking part of it and have somebody on your team that has a better skill set or is stronger at getting bank accounts and seizing assets. It's proven to be a better way to go about in tackling these things. All right, so I'm going to be done here in just a second. I'll hand it off to Tony, and I don't know how we're doing on time. But one of the things, and this is so we talked about, we have to do subpoenas or court orders or search warrants to get these records. These are the mechanisms that we have in place. One thing we look at too are tax and licensing records for businesses, and that's more along the lines of labor stuff that Amanda had touched on, where if the human trafficking charges aren't going to stick, it would be nice to be able to get them for some other violations. We do a lot of stuff in open source records. That's information you can find on the internet. It's amazing nowadays how much information is on the internet, way more than there used to be 10 years ago. In the United States, we can go on the internet and find out if a person has companies set up under their name, and a lot of times they're shell companies. And I don't know if you guys know what shell companies are. Shell companies are nothing more than companies that exist on paper in name only, but they really don't exist. There's not a building. And we find, I mean, that's super common with people who launder money. They set up shell companies all over the world just for the purpose of making it look like they can legitimize money moving through their banks. But they don't exist. And then the last one was, this is obviously something that not everybody can do, but the wiretap investigations, they're very frequent in the United States, more so for other crimes. Obviously there's a technological requirement for them in terms of having the technology to do them, but they're becoming more prevalent around the world. Most of ours are for drug investigations. I can tell you, my unit, the unit I worked on when I was a police officer, we did do some on human smuggling and human trafficking. I know the case we're going to talk about a little bit today, I believe, that was actually a wiretap investigation. It was a human trafficking that was done up in Italy, and it was actually part of it was a wiretap investigation. And that was how they learned of a lot of things that they did. So those type of investigations, you have to be experienced investigators to do them. They're super intrusive, but they're worth a ton of information. So just, again, things to get you guys thinking.
Made a money laundering threat assessment report, which talked about, and they identified 13 different methods of money laundering. First one was banks and other depository. Thank you. Banks and other depository financial institutions. So, in the USA, only banks and other depository financial institutions are allowed to receive financial deposits. And they provide direct deposits through the use of paper checks and various bank-to-bank electronic networks. Nigeria, I would assume it's probably the same. Money services businesses, though, are an alternative to banks for many financial services. They are required to use a financial institution to hold their deposits, clear checks, and settle transactions, but they don't have the same formalities that you have in a bank. So money launderers will use both consumer and business accounts to move unlawful cash proceeds through a banking system. So they may have their own personal account, they may create a fictitious corporate or business account, and they'll be moving that money, that dirty money, through the financial institution. So once criminally derived funds are introduced into the payment system or deposited funds are intended to finance a criminal act, it's often very difficult to identify them as they move from bank to bank. And that's exactly what the criminals want to do. They're playing a shell game and they want to confuse and they want to hide from law enforcement. So they're going to move that money around. Typically, what we've seen is the accounts are opened in the name of a phony, call them Smurf account holders, who are used to disguise a true identity of account holder beneficiary. So a fictitious person a straw person is used. And then cash deposits are then structured by keeping each deposit below the $10,000 threshold. Why? Because they don't want to file a currency transaction report. They want to avoid doing that. And then the money can then be transferred to other accounts or money laundering vehicles. That type of methodology where you're trying to avoid filing a currency transaction report is called structuring. So you're structuring your transaction to avoid your reporting requirements to move the money around. The second type that we see is the use of correspondent banks. So this is when money is being moved internationally. So when a U.S. bank customer wants to move money internationally, the U.S. bank will move into a correspondent banking relationship with a bank overseas. And that would be the same, I would believe, in Nigeria, that you're going to have correspondent banks throughout the world if you're going to do a foreign transaction. And then on the reverse side, you have a payable through account, which is a checking account that's owned by a foreign bank in your domestic bank. And so the foreign bank can then issue checks to its customers, allowing them to be drawn from funds from your national bank. So then we have a different method called nesting. And nested accounts provide indirect access by allowing a foreign bank that does not have a direct correspondent relationship with a U.S. bank to use a third party's correspondent bank to deposit. And this results in an increase in the number of persons with access to the same bank account. So if you have cross-border wire transfers, as they're becoming under more scrutiny, money launderers will change the form of transfer by using paper checks, money orders, and cashier's checks as an alternative. And I will give you an example. We were talking about the $10,000 currency report, but cashier's checks are more difficult to actually trace. So what would happen is they go across the border to a money services business, any of them, take that and wire the funds back to Mexico to 20, 30 accounts to launder the money. We'll see that kind of activity, that movement along many borders. See human trafficking going on, where you may see drug trafficking going on. So those are the two financial institution type of situations. Now we talk about money service businesses. And money service businesses are becoming huge throughout the world, especially now with mobile banking. How many people have cell phones that can wire money throughout the world? You have apps that can send money from anywhere, anytime. Or you have a banking app where you can go from one banking account to another banking account. You never have to show your face. You never have to file a report. You don't even have to sign anything. And money is being moved. And you're going to see, I'm sure, human traffickers with these phones, with these apps, they're making money. They're probably using these activities, these accounts, to send money back to finance purchasing homes, purchasing automobiles. It can be used readily, and it's an important tool. And the big difference is, again, money services business do not hold any accounts. They're legally obligated in the United States to verify a customer's identification only when selling $3,000 or more of money orders or traveler's checks, or a transfer of $3,000 or more. That's the only time they have to identify themselves. So what are they going to do? The same thing they do with the bank account. They're going to structure. So they're not going to do transactions above $3,000 anymore. So you're going to see the same person wiring many different types of funds, and they're going to be under $3,000. And I know Rich talked about suspicious activity reports. This is where it's very important to be able to educate your money services businesses, your banks, that if they see someone that's doing this, or if you see a transaction, the same person wiring multiple amounts of money the same day, that should raise a red flag. That should raise a red flag to the money services business, and hopefully they will raise a red flag with you that something suspicious is going on. And so this short-term nature of a customer's relationship with a money services business helps to facilitate money laundering because of the ease and the anonymity. Currency exchanges. And I know with the United States, our big partner for currency exchange is Mexico. But I would assume that Nigeria, having so many neighbors, you probably have many countries that are exchanging money, maybe back and forth. So currency dealers, money exchangers, bureau de change, casas de cambio, they change the currency from one country to that of another. And in the United States, very few local states regulate this activity, which makes it the most least regulated because it's not going through a federal financial scrutiny. But they're subject to general MSB regulations and subject to suspicious activity reports. So we go back to suspicious activity reports raising red flags. So if we see someone walking around and taking a lot of bulk cash, changing that money to to a currency, and then walking into the country or walking back and then using that, that might be very suspicious. So if they're walking in with more than, in your reporting would be the equivalent of $14,000, $15,000, if they met that threshold and you're seeing someone doing that very commonly, they may be laundering money. So currency exchanges are predominantly located along shared borders and in large tourist areas. In large tourist areas, what do we often see? Since there's a lot of influx and outgoing, we may see narco-drug trafficking. We will surely be seeing probably sex trafficking because you have tourists coming in often for the purpose of sex trade tourism. We may see labor trafficking of children or women who are being exploited, or even men, to work in some of these hotels under forced labor. And we may see the money laundering as this activity happens, and then the money is flowing back the other way. So once you have the money exchange made, then the bills can be more easily bulk shipped or deposited into accounts because you now have cash that a bank will take. And that cash came from dirty money, and you put it in the banking system, and it looks very legitimate. Exchange houses may accept cash from a customer that deposits his own account at a commercial banking institution. This we see in Mexico all of the time. These money exchange houses in Mexico will have a bank account in the United States across the border. So what they will do is they'll pull together all this money that they've received, give it to a person who will then go across the border. They may declare that they have more than $10,000. Yes, I'm carrying it, but it's not my money. It's the money of the money exchange house. I'm just an employee, and it's my job to go over and deposit it. And then they take that money and deposit it in the account of that money exchange house. And that is a very powerful money laundering technique. So as I said, they take illicit cash from many clients and then deposit the money in the name of the exchange house. In Mexico, what we've seen is the money that they're actually receiving has nothing to do with exchange. It's drug trafficking proceeds. So they take the drug trafficking proceeds and say, okay, now it's the money exchange house, which the drug traffickers actually own. They own the exchange house, and they're in the sole purpose of conducting this business, even though they may conduct legitimate money exchange. That's cover for them. Check cashers. Do you have check cashing services in Nigeria? Where someone can take their check that they don't have an actual bank account, but a money service business will cash their check for them for a commission. Western Union might, but I'm talking about Money Tree, those kinds of things, not so much that it's being transferred, but they will cash your check. Does that exist here? It's growing a lot in the United States, where you have a business solely it's in the purpose that for a commission will cash a check. for people who don't have bank accounts. And money launderers will use it, often with money transmitters and informal value systems. So a criminal will take illicit cash to buy a third-party check made payable to multiple small businesses and then use a check cashing business to cash the checks. So now I've taken all of these proceeds that look like legitimate checks and going to check cashing businesses. And even though they're losing commission at every time they cash it, they've now turned dirty money into what looks like clean money. The problem with check cashers in the United States is even though they're required to file currency transaction reports if the amount is greater than $10,000, unfortunately, they're not required to put suspicious activity reports yet. There's a push to get them to do so. And hopefully they will. But that loophole, not filing that suspicious activity report, causes the issue. And you can't trace those illicit proceeds because you don't have a suspicious activity report and they're being used widely to cash checks. Money orders. So money orders, which is also a money service business, they're attractive to money launderers. Why? Because they can be issued in large dollar denominations, less bulky than cash, and if they're under $3,000, they're anonymous. So you get a money order for whatever amount of cash you have. Under $3,000, it's anonymous. They'll take that money order and they'll go cash it somewhere. Or they'll purchase something with it. So common technique is to structure multiple money orders under $3,000. And the parent firm that will issue that money order, Western Union or MoneyGram, is not required to review any individual suspicious activity report. Stored value. Prepaid cards. Do you see them in Nigeria? A Visa cash card. Yes, they're very popular throughout the world. Stored value cards can use many uses or technologies. They can have chips, magnetic strips, any access number, or password. And there are two types. There's an open system card that can be used to make purchases from merchants or get cash at ATMs that connect global payment networks like Visa and MasterCard. So one of the things we've seen is this dirty money is being used to buy multiple stored value cards. And those multiple stored value cards are then being sold to various people. And they've laundered money using that. In open systems, although issued through banks and other depository institutions, generally do not require a bank account or a face-to-face verification of the identity. You have cash and you buy it, it's yours. It's never been reported. There is no requirement as to the holder because you're using the card itself to get the money or an anonymous PIN. And right now there are no regulatory guidelines that cover customer identification, record keeping, or any reporting requirement for such an open system payment card. Closed system cards are cards that you use to buy goods or services from a specific merchant or a specific provider using the bank. So if you have a home improvement store card or a certain grocery store card, you can only use it there. But that is another type of stored value system. It's not as widely available, but you can use it. And I'll give you an example. In the United States, we have a home improvement store called Home Depot. Mexico now has Home Depot. So what you've seen is to launder the money and to send it back to Mexico, they've actually purchased Home Depot cards in the United States with dirty money, and they take those Home Depot cards back to Mexico and sell them. So here you go. You can use it at the store to get your home improvement equipment. And they've now laundered money pretty anonymously, and the people are actually paying the face value for it because they need the card. So open system, the ones that are widely used, give you greater opportunity for anonymity in storing, transporting, or accessing illicit cash globally. Can you take a Visa card, a Visa prepaid card, and use it anywhere in the world? Yes, you can. And that makes it very attractive to laundering money. Now, you may not be able to use that Home Depot card because you don't have Home Depot, but the open system, clearly, if it's backed by Visa, if it's backed by MasterCard, what a good tool. And you can put those cards in your briefcase, fly anywhere, and then use them. So issues, sellers, and redeemers of stored value are classes, MSBs, in the United States and the relevant regulations. But what is the loophole there? They're not required to file a suspicious activity report. Why? Because everyone uses these cards. They don't look that suspicious. Now, if someone buys, they'll buy 5 here, 5 there, and accumulate them. But because you can be anonymous and not have to file suspicious activity reports, they're very effective. Money transmitters, so your Western Unions, MoneyGrams. So there's a large number of them, and they have easy access to money, makes them more attractive to money launderers. Why? Again, they're anonymous for the most part, and you only require identification when you're going to wire money more than $3,000. And I don't know what the limit is in Nigeria, your monetary limit, but you need to know what it is to see if you have an individual who's wiring a lot of money just under that amount.
One of the things that those MSBs, the money service businesses, will do, so it's $3,000 in the United States you're required to show ID when you send money through those. Certain states lower that amount. In Arizona, it's only $1,000. So even though the federal law requires $3,000, in Arizona it's $1,000. And I can tell you what Western Union will do, and I believe MoneyGram and FinCEN does. FinCEN calls them geographical targeting orders. But if there's certain areas around the world that, so for example, we'll use Tapachula, Mexico. Tapachula, Mexico is just above the Guatemalan border. And it's huge, huge human smuggling problem in Tapachula, Mexico. So there was a female there that was a human smuggler that was smuggling Middle Easterners into Mexico from all different countries in the Middle East, and they were going up into the United States. What Western Union did was they dropped the threshold down. They weren't letting any money get sent or paid out without an ID that was over $100. So there are things they can do that put in place. Like Tony said, it's $3,000 is the number for us.
Yes, and there's traveler's checks, withdraw from an account, and also get credit and debit cards through the internet. In the United States, the citizens can access payment services online that are based outside the U.S. and transfer funds electronically or by mail, so they're using a foreign correspondent. And the same online payment services exist to facilitate transactions for online gambling and adult content services. How readily available is online gambling? Very readily available. You know, you look at football teams that have WinBet, they have everything on their jerseys. Use these betting services. You can launder money very easily by making it look like you're placing bets and using those services. So WinBet could be money laundering bet instead of WinBet. And that is a scheme. Online casinos, gambling, the same thing. And those payment services offer immediate final settlements with no recourse. So at the end, there's no recourse if you say, okay, you have to settle up your transaction with the casino. Casinos themselves, legal casinos, the ones you can walk in, are a place that you can launder money. In the United States, our Native American tribes have casinos. So one of the things that will happen, a money launderer will go in with cash and buy casino chips. And they may play a little bit or a lot, doesn't matter. But they're using dirty money. And what they'll do is they'll cash the chips. And what do they get back? They get money. Legitimate cash from that casino that they've now laundered under the guise that they've been playing in their high roller. So it's a high volume cash business. So they're susceptible to money laundering and other financial crimes. But one of the things that we recognized was that problem, that gap. So casinos were required, like banks, to develop anti-money laundering programs. So now we have casinos that will file suspicious activity reports. You can track someone who's been going to the same roulette table 20, 30 times, cashing their chips, walking right out. So an example, we're talking about the purchase of casino chips, and then you can use them in the casino to get a check, to wire money into a bank account, or to get any goods or services directly from the casino. The casino is almost acting like a bank. And so while criminals structure transactions at banks and MSBs, they use casinos for the opposite purpose. So what you do is having a CTR filed in a casino payout has the effect of making the money appear legitimate. I'm a gambler. Here's what I won. I'm a gambler. Here's what I lost.
Pimps love to, in the United States, pimps love to go to the casinos, and they all the time. We've seen it all the time where you see a bunch of unexplained money in their pocket, and they say that they won money at a casino, and it's from doing exactly what Tony just said.
Not a question. A case in Nigeria is most of the transfer, money laundering within Nigeria to offshore is majorly among the political class. But when it comes to issue of trafficking, the trolleys that the madam oversee sent money to organize the girls in Nigeria, what they do is they majorly use Western Union and MoneyGrams. So Western Union and MoneyGrams, the FIU, within the regulatory framework, has put some measures in place that a certain amount of money cannot come from overseas. Specifically for an individual, something of $5,000 will raise suspicious. So what they do is they break down, like you say. But the state in Nigeria that have highest rate of MoneyGram and Western Union is in Benin, Edo State. They have the highest rate.
Yes.
And we are able to pinpoint it that they equally are endemic state when it comes to trafficking in person. So, but because of the regulatory of our financial regulation, it is difficult for the big madam or the main trafficker overseas in Italy or in America or to bring cash. So what they do to launder the money is they take the cash and buy commodity and send it down to Nigeria. So the latest trend that we are now observing is they send it through by buying fairly used vehicle,
yes,
used clothes, refrigerator, equipment, even computer. They send it down. So when they send it down, their brother, their relative will take the goods, sell it off, get the money, and do whatever he or she has instructed to use that money for in Nigeria. So that's a pattern.
You have hit something that's very important, which is trade-based money laundering. And if that's what you're seeing, we see that in Mexico as well. And I'll give you an example on a case that I happened to just come upon that dealt with Mexico. So the money launderers were going, this was through Texas and New Mexico, mostly Texas. And what they were doing is they were buying French perfume with dirty money, sending the French perfume that they bought in the United States to be sold in Mexico City, where it was even sold for a lot more money. And so computers often will be bought with illicit money. Cell phones, high-end goods, Rolex watches, French perfume, whatever is very expensive, and that is a very useful tool for laundering money, is to take those goods that will get a domestic market, which they got from laundered money in a different country.
Yeah, for the past few years, that's been probably the most common way to launder money in the United States with drug traffickers is trade-based money laundering. One of the things that they're really popular for, known to be buying, is heavy construction equipment. So they'll buy heavy construction equipment in the United States, have it sent down to Mexico, and do the same thing. Send it down there or sell it down there, and then they've made their money. The other thing that they do is, and we noticed this, and I actually talked about it to an informant of mine when I was a detective who was doing this. We see a lot of sending money from the United States to China, where they're buying, in this particular example, they were buying colored pencils. They were buying purportedly hundreds of thousands of dollars of colored pencils from a manufacturer in China, and those colored pencils were then getting sent to Mexicali, Mexico, where they were being sold. Well, obviously in the United States, we have no way of, China's not going to give us anything. But what was really happening was they were sending money to China. There was a bad guy in China, an organized crime group that they were working with, taking that money and then sending it to the banks for them in Mexico. They were also sending colored pencils, but not hundreds of thousands of dollars like they said they were buying. They were playing with the invoices, so they over and under invoice. So if you guys could do that, you could see that happening here as well if you have a problem country.
Absolutely, those are great examples. And the one thing with the tractors, Mexico has big agricultural production like the United States, and actually buying tractors is something they do very often. But we saw an unusual amount of orders from a certain Caterpillar dealership, I think it was in Iowa, going to the same place in Mexico. And then they could take those tractors, which are very valuable, and sell them for Mexico for so much more. But again, the source was dirty money, and they were using that to do trade-based money laundering. Bulk cash smuggling. We used to see that a lot more with drug trafficking in Mexico, but it's where you conceal or smuggle or attempt to smuggle more than $10,000 in currency or monetary instruments in and out of the country with the intent to evade having to file a currency or monetary instrument report. And it's used by money launderers to move illicit cash in and out of the country to places that have lax or complicit financial institutions or to fund criminal enterprises. So you'll often find someone, we've talked about porous borders, well, how about porous border financial requirements? So if someone has a lot of cash and knows they can go into a country where they're not going to be required to report it, or they can under-report or do very easily move that money, they're going to move that money to that jurisdiction to hide it. And as I said, the U.S. shares a 3,987-mile border, so about 6,000 kilometer, and then with Mexico, it's about a 3,000-kilometer border. And some of those places, you have small towns. Easy to move money back and forth. Rich talked about the town of Calexico. That is east of San Diego. It's a very small, rural, agricultural area, where in San Diego you may have 600,000 cars going back and forth daily. This is a very small port. And it's very accessible because you cross the border and now you can take that money, that bulk cash, take it to an MSB in Calexico and wire it all back to the United States. So.
And in Nigeria, most of these cash smugglers also use borders with Benin Republic. You know, some of these countries where the regulations are lax, I also use they wire the money down there and they move it across border physically to Nigeria. I know in Nigeria too, because of the fact that we have not really developed our online system, most of this cash are moved, you know, physically. For example, if you walk across the road there, just along the road, you see lots of people hanging out. They have millions of dollars. You can get $1 billion across the road there if you want. So my question is, how do you track transactions when you have a country with that kind of system of you know,
what you need are reporting requirements. Because without the reporting requirement, it makes it very easy to move that large amount of money. And so if there isn't a law to require reporting, when you know all that movement is occurring, then one needs to be enacted. Because you need to have some sort of record keeping, hopefully, because one of the things that we did with the CMIR was exactly that. It allowed that reporting to require. And the other thing that happens with the CMIR, whoever signs it has to sign it under penalty of perjury. And if they lie, that's a separate crime. You can charge that person with perjury, even though you may not have anything else on them at the time.
But in Nigeria, corruption plays a very important is a factor.
Yes.
Some of these transactions go unreported. For example, you can actually have dollar accounts in some of these banks. Money is moved. They go unreported.
Yes.
So that's it. So
that's a national issue that something has to be dealt with, because you know, corruption can be a factor. Corruption was a factor in Mexico, and some of the laundered money, Mexico put in place reporting requirements to deal in large part with their own domestic narco trafficking, but also because it was beneficial because the crime was flowing both ways, and to get Mexico to convince themselves, and I will say this in my opinion, because there was rampant corruption, they didn't have reporting requirements. They changed that law. So if there is a way of getting reporting requirements, and you can get your legislature to pass it, I would very much strongly suggest that it happen, but that may be a factor that could hamper it. But if you see all that kind of movement going on, usually what they'll take that bulk cash is, then they'll buy goods. Then you can convert that into trade-based money laundering, or they'll wire the money. It will just be one less tool that you may have, unfortunately, if you don't have that reporting requirement. But you still, if you can follow the money, maybe get the laundering scheme later down the line, but it makes it more difficult, and you can't stop it at the border as readily without that. But if you know that they're taking what they're using that money in the other, and sharing a lot of information, because they're seeing the fraud and those transactions going both ways. So what's happening is, let's say when you cross the border, in Mexico, it's a crime, a Mexican crime, not to declare the equivalent of $400 in goods or services. So what you get is you get people from Mexico buying an expensive watch and saying it's worth $300, or going across, or I've only purchased $300 worth of goods and services, and they make them open their trunk and they have $1,000 of goods and services. And so that benefits them, and if we get the same cooperation coming up, and often that intelligence is shared, and you can get that kind of threshold, that information met. But that is an issue. If it's something that's permissible and you're seeing bulk cash going back and forth, and how you deal with that later, it's more of an obstacle, unfortunately.
Hello.
Yes, sir?
Okay, I just wanted to share this with us. Nigeria as a nation have made tremendous progress in the regulation of money laundering. I can tell you that within the shore of this country, it is difficult to wire some substantial amount of money outside because of the measure that was put in place. But what these money launderers, what they do, they would rather do with cash than to go through this wire.
Yes.
And because of the treaties of ECOWAS, because of the free movement and some porosity in our border with our neighbor, what they do is they connive with some law enforcement and other people at the border and take this cash out. So taking this cash out, they can transact it from, let's assume, Ghana, because there was an incident in Nigeria that we have when the government decided to put a peg on the level of amount you can spend outside Nigeria with your MasterCard or with your Visa card. It becomes a problem. So what people do is people decide to start breaking down their money. Somebody was caught at our airport in Nigeria here with over 300 ATM, and all have about $3,000 on each. So it becomes a problem for you to take out electronically money outside the shores of Nigeria. So what they do is they deal with cash across the border. And once it's out, you can always maneuver your way through Ghana, through Benin, through the neighboring, even Chad, Cameroon, and other places to transact. So that's what they do.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And sometimes when you see those difficulties, if you were to see a lot of bulk cash, you may not be able to, because of those difficulties, maybe make a money laundering case, but it could lead you to human trafficking, and it could lead you to narco trafficking as well. So if you see that kind of movement, then you start looking for other potential crimes and other potential sources to see what you may have. So you use money laundering when that tool is available to you, but it's also an indicia that other criminal activity is occurring.
You know, one of the, it doesn't matter what, whenever we put new laws in place, you're just going to move the activity to some other sector, right? So, I mean, picture a balloon. You know, if you have a balloon and you squeeze a balloon, it's going to inflate somewhere else. And that's what happens. If you put money laundering laws in place to get the money out of the financial system, bad guys, criminals, human traffickers are going to have to find a different way to move their money. So while, yeah, I agree with that. I understand what you're saying. They're finding different ways to do it. The nice part about it is you're making it more difficult for them, right? And if we can't always catch them or stop them, we're at least going to slow them down because they're not able to just move the money through the bank that easily. You're going to make it more difficult, and it's going to be more, it's going to become more costly for them to do that because they're having to pay people to do it.
Right, and it's absolutely true. And a big example was with this reporting requirement. What we were seeing from Mexico is they were getting caught not reporting. So what they do, they report. They say, I have $11,000 with me, and then go buy the goods or then go use the money services providers to wire the money back. So it made it more difficult. The point you had made, sir, you could use the bulk cash to either further investigate, or also it makes it more difficult. So they have to find some other way as well. And so if you see the bulk cash, you may have another crime, or if you see these reporting requirements, the example is they may skirt it. In the United States, what we saw is they would declare it, say we have $11,000, and they would write the report and still cross the money, but then would go directly to that bank and use the money services business. So it makes it more difficult for them to launder the money, and they will lose more money because now they have to pay, for example, commissions and fees to get the wire transfers. And if they have to do a lot of this, it hampers a little bit of their activity, even if it doesn't prevent it. So it's still worthwhile to follow it. But if you can get regulations, great. But after a while, the criminals get very savvy and will go from one technique to another technique. So what we saw is that cash flow going out of the United States border retraced the routes that the illegal drugs followed when they entered the United States. So the drugs and the money followed each other. And then the cash would either stay in Canada or Mexico, and then would be transferred to a number of other countries or through a U.S. bank. And cash could be smuggled out of the U.S. by official land, sea, and airports of entry and unofficial routes along the border. One of the things that we've seen with money laundering and drug trafficking from China is they'll put money in a shipment container. And that shipment container will go from China to the port of Long Beach, and instead of goods in there in that container, bulk cash. So you have to alert sometimes your port authorities as well that these kinds of activities could happen. That when they open up a container, when they inspect it, you could have illegal drugs, you could have illegal cash, and unfortunately in the case of China, we've also seen human trafficking in containers and deaths and other situations. And so working together with your port authorities, working together with your custom authorities as part of your investigative tools, as part of your task force is highly recommended.
Yeah, you know, just the, when you brought up the ports in Long Beach, California, it reminded me. Our massage parlors in the United States, the Asian massage parlors make so much money, they have to come up with a multitude of ways to move their money back to China. So what we see is we see a ton of money. So the massage parlor investigations we've done in Arizona, and there's two guys on our task force, two guys that do nothing but massage parlor investigations in Arizona, and they've become really good at them. Ton of money in cash goes to the garment district, which is in California where they live. We see a ton of trade-based money laundering, like you talked about, where they'll buy precious metals, gems, and anything you can think of to be brought back to China. They'll send women over just to body carry money through the airports. they use all different ways because they have so much cash on hand that they have to find a way to get it back. And then we'll see the money go over to China, and then we'll see on a weekly basis. There was one investigation we had last year, weekly basis, $50,000 every couple days into their bank accounts, wires from China.
One of the laundering effects, in Rich brought up the garment district. In Los Angeles, there's a huge garment district that will make clothing, T-shirts. And what the launderers from China were doing is they're getting workers in California to put labels that said made in China on the garment and sell those, even though they were made in the United States, often by humanly trafficked employees, and then using that to sell made in China T-shirts made in California in Mexico. And that was a money laundering operation, a big one. Underwear, T-shirts, and that was another way that they used trade-based money laundering by affecting that kind of fraud that started with massage parlor money that went to Los Angeles to make these garments to sell them as made in China in Mexico. I'm sorry, so that goes back to when you have commercial trade with international treaties, sometimes you'll have money laundering because you have legitimate goods and services, but you will have those kinds of gray market or illegal goods to launder money. So in addition to cash from drug sales, you have other cash-intensive sources of illicit income, which include, and as this gentleman said, we have alien smuggling, bribery, contraband, smuggling, extortion, fraud, illegal gambling, kidnapping, prostitution, and tax evasion. All types of activities that the drug traffickers use or human traffickers will use as well. Shell companies and trusts. This gets very complicated. But in 1998, the United Nations reported that the principal forms of abuse of secrecy have shifted from individual bank accounts to corporate bank accounts and then to trusts or other corporate forms. So shell companies and trusts can use bearer shares and nominee shareholders as directors to hide ownership and mask financial transactions. So legal jurisdictions, whether countries or entities elsewhere that offer strict secrecy laws, you can have lax regulatory and supervisory regimes, and corporate registries that safeguard anonymity are an easy target for money launderers. In the United States, we see shell companies that are formed in the Caribbean they're using their corporate legal form to create a company that really doesn't exist to move and issue shares. So those shell companies will create an intermediary, some nominee incorporation service to establish a shell company and bank accounts on behalf of foreign clients. You can go on the internet and then establish a corporation in another country and use that as your shell. And then you hire a firm to act as the intermediary, and the true owners of the shell company or other legal entity can avoid disclosing their own identities in corporate filings and in documentations used to open bank accounts. So that shell company will file tax returns for the company, will conduct businesses as a trust of the company, and that company or that business doesn't really exist. It's used to launder money. So a bearer share is a negotiable instrument that gives ownership of a company to a person who has a certificate. And those bearer share certificates don't contain the name of the shareholder, and they're not registered. You'll have a serial number. So that company, that phony company, has issued 100 shares, and I now hold shares 1 through 27. And those shares provide for a high level of anonymity or easily negotiable because you can sell them. Do you want to buy shares in this company? Sure, here you go. You transfer it at a value of $100, and now you've transferred value even though that share is anonymous and you don't know the source of that share. Trusts give the same anonymity to money launderers. So trusts separate legal ownership from beneficial ownership. And a trust creator can transfer that legal ownership or assets to a trustee, which can be a person or a corporation. And the trustee will manage the assets on behalf of the beneficiary based on the terms of the trust deeds. In Mexico, narco-trafficking organizations have financial planners and attorneys that create trusts, that create shell companies for them and move this money all over the world. Trusts don't require registration or a central registry, and there are very few authorities charged with overseeing trusts. In the United States, any state, you can have a trust created under state law. As well as in Mexico, any state can create a trust. And in most jurisdictions, you don't have to disclose the identity of the beneficiary or the creator of the trust to the authorities. And because you can hide ownership and mask financial details, trusts are very popular tools for money launderers. So that's very sophisticated. So you will need your corporate and financial investigators to start looking into shell trusts, shell corporations and trusts. Trade-based money laundering, we talked about that. This, I believe, bulk cash and trade-based money laundering is what we have seen the most of for human trafficking. We used to see it the most for narco trafficking, but we're now seeing it more and more for both. And that's when money laundering use trade transactions to provide cover for and legitimize funds. And you can use many techniques. You can over or under invoice for a product, as Rich mentioned. Often they'll take a product, and it doesn't matter to them if they over invoice or under invoice, because they're going to hide the proceeds. But what it can do, though, is if you're seeing over or under invoicing, you can then focus in on that activity. Your regulators can look at it to see why you're seeing over and under invoicing. And you can often charge them with tax fraud, financial fraud, just based on that. Double invoicing, common technique. They say, okay, there are 100 watches here, when really there are only 50. So they're getting greedy and double invoicing to conduct trade-based money laundering. Misclassification of the goods shipped. And we talked about the pencils and other things. They'll say, there'll be a shipment, and they'll say, really, what we're shipping is colored pencils, and what you find in there are diamonds or Rolexes. And they'll use schemes like that. And this one is a growing one. Precious commodities, gems and metals can be used as alternatives to cash to transfer value across borders. So diamonds, very attractive. Why? Because it can easily be concealed and transported across porous borders, and they're mined in remote areas of the world. So diamonds are virtually untraceable to their original source until they're finished. And so when diamonds are transported openly, it's easy to mislabel their value for money laundering purposes. It's very hard to establish the value of a diamond, especially a raw diamond. That can be used to launder money. This is very complex, but life insurance policies have been used to launder money. And one of the schemes that we saw in Mexico is that life insurance policies were being issued to decedents, persons who died, were no longer living, and someone was cashing in on that policy. And that was used to launder money. And then annuity contracts, where you can get a payment, is a way also that can be used through life insurance. The insurance industry, though, is subject to state regulation, but not federal regulation. So this is a gap that the money launderers will use. So, and then state regulation is for safety and soundness and not anti-money laundering initiatives. Why? Because we normally don't think of life insurance policies as a vehicle for money laundering, and it's being used. Virtual currency, Bitcoin, that is a big growing activity globally. And so we have to be cognizant of Bitcoin or any other digital currency. They facilitate money laundering and cybercrime and human trafficking. Sometimes human traffickers are paid with virtual currency throughout the world. And they have several benefits. It's instant, it's constantly available, and it's anonymous. It's basically a digital transaction. And it can be conducted from anywhere, and you can get instant access. And sometimes you can get mobile payments through web-enabled phones. Have you seen any websites that say you can buy this product for X amount of Bitcoins? Yeah, people are now taking Bitcoins to buy cars, to buy watches. They'll convert the Bitcoin and act as if it's cash and use that to launder money.
Tony, real quick, one of the things that we're seeing, so we talked about Backpage earlier. In the United States, all Backpage ads that girls take out, so the ads where girls are on Backpage, those have to be paid for in Bitcoin. Yes. So what can happen is they can take a prepaid card, a gift card, or whatever kind of cash they have, bank account. You can go to a payment process server and pay that company, but that company will take out your ad for you on Backpage, but it's all paid for in Bitcoin. And what we're also seeing is a lot of girls now are offering up their services where they're meeting guys in hotel rooms, and they're saying, pay me in Bitcoin. So it's becoming more and more difficult to find that money. You know, in Bitcoin, I mean, Bitcoin law enforcement is still so far behind on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is probably the least anonymous virtual currency there is that's out there. There's a lot of other virtual currencies out there that are way more truly anonymous in terms of coins like Monero, for example, and Zcash, that are truly anonymous, that we can't do anything with. There are some things we can do to trace Bitcoin transactions, and actually our nonprofit is actually getting ready. We're starting to do it through the Backpage stuff. We're actually working a project right now. But that's going to make things even more difficult than they are right now. But I'm glad you guys are at least aware of it. When I was in Rwanda back in December speaking there, it was just on money laundering, and I think there was like 1 or 2 people in the class, and it was this size, that even knew what Bitcoin was. They were completely unaware of it.
Yeah, and we're seeing different types of currencies and even certain digital currencies that are only available on the dark web. That's how sophisticated they've become.
I actually went online last night to see if you could buy Bitcoin on the streets here in Nigeria. Not legally, but you can. There's people here that are offering it for sale. Yeah, so yes, you can go to localbitcoin.com and buy it here. The exchange rate is ridiculous, but you can buy it. There's people right here. Yes.
It's online and it's very expensive, but it can be done.
It's online, but the beauty of it was in the National Assembly, there was a resolution that CBN and Security Exchange Commission should sensitize Nigerians about the Bitcoin, because a lot of people have come with the idea. And with the present situation of Bitcoin, even the day before yesterday, the Bitcoin lost over $100 billion in value, and that has created a lot of panic in the world. And every country now is putting down the law against cryptocurrency. It is not. So the trafficker, the illegal people are having it difficult to skate through with Bitcoin.
Yeah, but what happens and what makes Bitcoin so effective is that it's unregulated. It is an unregulated currency, and so they thumb their noses at governments, and they thumb their noses at law enforcement. They will continue on, and so we still have to be cognizant, and I agree, we're seeing more and more regulation against Bitcoin, or non-recognition of Bitcoin. In some countries, it's been recognized as just personal property, not even as currency of value. So they'll say it's not a currency, but it has a value. And it does for drug traffickers, and it does for human traffickers. Yes, sir.
Last year, this issue of MMM has really discouraged a lot of people. That is why people are not paying too much attention on the Bitcoin, because of what happened on the issue of MMM.
I can tell you in the United States, I was telling Tony yesterday, our Congress in the United States was meeting with regulators today to make some decisions on what they were going to do with Bitcoin, because we're having a hard time with it. A lot of the criminals in the United States are buying it from localbitcoin.com, the website. Localbitcoin.com is based in Finland, and they don't really care what we have to say. They don't care.
Yeah, as it when they thought about what was Bitcoin, our Treasury Department says it's not currency as we know it. It's not backed by a government, it's not currency, but it can be property. It can be personal property. But now I think they're thinking through, as Rich said, they're meeting to say, well, how are they going to treat Bitcoin at this moment? And it's a very difficult, touchy situation. But we have to rely on our regulators in whatever they do and then work with that. But they're having great difficulty with Bitcoin and other electronic currencies. And they're considering that it's not only going to be Bitcoin, all the others that are springing up and popping up. So again, they're obtained online, not subject to customer identification, and which you would have with a bank or even with a money service business. So they're privately owned online payment systems. They function as one transnational currency. There's no government. There's no boundary. It exists in cyberspace. And some claim to be backed by precious metals or other national currencies, and often they lie. They're not backed by anything other than whatever trust is in the cyber world. And metal-backed digital currency accounts are valued based on the banking commodities fluctuating spot price. So it fluctuates. It goes up and down. And as we heard, it went down $1,000 yesterday. And it can go down even more, or it can spike up, and we don't know how that occurs. But it doesn't have the attributes of real currency, and it doesn't have legal status in any jurisdiction. And that is the most important thing. There is no one who has recognized it legally. So currency is something that's monetized by a monetizing authority like a central bank and not part of a bartering exchange. And Bitcoin is electronic bartering. So the European Central Bank has explained the differences between digital currency and electronic money schemes. So electronic money uses a traditional unit of currency and is regulated. So what you wire, it has a value in a currency that's recognized. It's backed by a central bank. Virtual currencies like Bitcoin have no regulation, and it's invented. It's an invented currency, and it's an invented amount. So European community has electronic money schemes with US dollars or euros, or virtual currency invented. So under FinCEN regulations, virtual currency cannot be a money service business. It's not a financial institution either. So if it doesn't define it as a money transmission service, so it's not subject to registration, reporting, and record-keeping regulations, which is why money launderers like it. You don't have to report, you don't have to identify, and there's no record-keeping other than what the computer is doing in cyberspace.
There's a number of places to buy it, like we just said. You can buy it from a number of different places. The biggest exchanger in the United States is Coinbase, and they're based out of California. Their system has crashed multiple times because they are actually a licensed MSB. Like, I have an account at Coinbase where I've bought Bitcoin before, but they take all of my information when I open my account. Like, they have my ID, they have everything. But just to give you an idea of how much money is going into that arena where bad people are still jumping into that pool, they're opening up on average, in the month of December, they opened up on average 100,000 new accounts a day. That's how many people are putting money into it. So you can only imagine what the source of those funds are, right?
Plus, they're not foolproof from hackers. And you have hackers out there that are trying to hack into the system and take a Bitcoin. How do you trace that? Once a Bitcoin has been hacked, who claims ownership? And so that is one of the vulnerabilities. But until that happens and there's some trust, money launderers will use it until they lose money using Bitcoin.
But Backpage has caught on to it because they're making these people pay for these ads using Bitcoin. So you know there's human traffickers out there that are receiving it from the girls, from the victims that are being trafficked, because they have these wallets opened up already.
Yeah, and they're using that to source and promote their activities, again, through laundered funds. So, again, it's not a money transmitter. It's a new world in where we're going. And if you have any questions, this PowerPoint will be made available to you. But we have a couple more minutes before we break for lunch. If you have any questions or if you want to discuss it after lunch, please feel free and go ahead. Thank you.
And I think we're doing a case study after lunch. Are we doing the case study after lunch? I mean,
we can.
Yeah. So after lunch, we'll eat lunch now, and then when we come back, we'll talk about the case study I talked about the investigation that was done up in Italy involving people from Africa that Western Union helped us out with. We'll talk about that.
So thank you and have a good lunch.